I've been asked to discuss the philosophical implications of consumerism. So I shall start with a stereotypically philosophical question. What is the point of life? I believe the point of life is to be happy. Many philosophers agree with me, from Aristotle to Hume to John Stuart Mill. There are, of course, philosophers who would disagree with me, but I find their arguments depressing. Be that as it may, if happiness is our goal, the question arises, how does one achieve happiness? There is no one path to happiness. On the contrary, there are many. However, these many paths to happiness tend to fall into two main categories: consumptive happiness and creative happiness. Consumptive happiness is easy to understand. It consists of consuming things like food, booze, drugs, services, and stuff in general. Things you can buy. This consumption leads to instant gratification. It is a sort of shortcut to happiness. However, consumptive happiness also tends to be very short-lived. Our appetites are never slaked. Indeed, the more we consume, the hungrier we become. We'll talk more on this later. Consumptive happiness also tends to be hard on a person, especially when pursued to excess. Creative happiness is harder to define. It consists of things like learning, relationships, experiences, and accomplishments. These things tend to not be as instantaneously gratifying. We have to work at these things. Yet that very investment of effort makes us appreciate them more. This effort also makes the pleasure we derive from them much more lasting. Those who seek happiness in consumption are unlikely to ever find it for long. The pleasure of a new acquisition is notoriously ephemeral. No sooner have you bought the latest, shiniest thing than a newer, shinier version comes onto the market. The customer's satisfaction is tragically short. Whereas the sense of accomplishment you get from, say, climbing a mountain or writing a poem, the giddy sensation of knowing someone loves you, the pride you take in mastering a concept, these tend to stay with you, often for the rest of your life. You can think back fondly on a good conversation, the view from a mountaintop, or a job well done. The same cannot be said of last season's Louis Vuitton bag. Now, not all forms of happiness fit neatly into either category. Sex, for example, can certainly be either creative or consumptive, depending on if it's the culmination of a prolonged courtship or a one-night stand. Likewise, if you work hard to save up for a designer jacket, it will bring you a more lasting pleasure than if someone simply gave it to you. Both of these cases highlight the fact that it is not so much the objects of our desires that give us lasting pleasure, but the struggle and effort that we put into achieving them. In short, creative happiness is something that lasts. It is something we create by our own effort. That's why I call it creative. And since we create it, it is, by its very nature, unlimited. The only limit is the effort you are willing to put into it. By contrast, consumptive happiness is not only ephemeral, it is limited. It is something you buy, either a product like a sandwich or a shirt, a gadget, a car, or a service, or it could be a service like getting a pedicure or a massage. Both the products and the professional's time are limited. They have a price. They are for sale, and thus happiness is commodified. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with buying products or services. I will address this point at length at the end of my lecture. Yet the commodification of happiness has some nasty potential side effects. It consumes the world's finite resources at a dizzying rate. It creates tons of waste as yesterday's cherished possessions transition into today's trash. It makes you a pawn for any slick marketer who is trying to sell you something. Yet perhaps the most pernicious side effect of commodified happiness is that it makes it more difficult for you to create happiness. Why is that? Well, first of all, it's hard to force oneself to invest the time and effort into delayed gratification when instant gratification is so close at hand. Broccoli is simply harder to eat in the presence of donuts. Second, the commodification of happiness makes people selfish with their happiness by turning happiness into a zero-sum game. If happiness is finite, then any happiness I give you is happiness I no longer have for myself. This attitude can sabotage our personal relationships. Third, people seeking only consumptive pleasures tend to confuse personal relationships with market relationships. That is, they see other people in the light of what they can do for them. People who have material wealth are in turn suspicious that everyone is trying to use them. A poor man never has any doubt who his friends are. A rich man must always wonder what people want from him. As a result, those who pursue consumptive happiness often do so at the expense of friendship, community, and love. So, why do people pick the consumptive sort of happiness over the creative sort? It can't be that they're ignorant. None of these revelations are new. Our respective cultures are full of cautionary tales about the dangers of pursuing wealth over friendship, and sappy songs about how money can't buy me love. Our entire education system is a practice in delayed gratification. Yet people still pursue instant gratification through consumptive happiness. Why? Well, for one, it's easier. Making your own happiness is hard work. Also, it's what everyone else is doing. If I don't buy nice shoes too, people will think less of me. Yet perhaps the most compelling reason to prefer consumptive happiness is that the results of creative happiness are not guaranteed. When you buy a candy bar, a computer, or a massage, you know what you're getting. By contrast, when you invest the time and effort into creating something, you might not be satisfied with the outcome. Your poem might suck. Your diet and exercise routine might not be effective. And when it comes to investing time and energy into relationships with people, the outcome is even less certain. The problem with depending on other human beings for happiness is that human beings are fallible. They are inconstant. They are imperfect. Our family may not understand us. Our friends may abandon us in our time of need. Our lovers may spurn us. And because these relationships are so important to us, they can hurt us in ways that no physical wound ever could. This is the paradox of the human community. The very thing that gives us lasting happiness can also be the source of such uncertainty and anguish. Considering the uncertain return on our investment in people, material goods seem like a much more dependable investment. Unlike people, objects are constant. They don't change their minds. They do not judge us. Most importantly, objects can't leave us, because unlike people, we can own objects. They belong to us. They are ours in a way no human being ever could or should be. Yet many people try to do just that. They try to own people, to buy them, to control them, to dominate them. Back in the day, they had slaves. Today, we have the service industry. Being able to buy a person, or at least their services, further leads us to confuse market relationships with personal relationships. We see others in terms of their market value. Friendship is replaced with networking. Marriage becomes a transaction. With enough money, we may even convince ourselves that with the security of wealth, we don't need the support of a community or the edification of effort. Why deal with all these unpredictable people? Why work hard for happiness? I already work hard for money. Surely, with enough money, my every need, my every desire can be met. Which brings us to the danger of pursuing consumptive happiness. It may seem to provide an escape from the uncertain outcomes of trying to create happiness, Yet in doing so, it also poisons the wellspring of creative happiness by leading us to assign monetary value to things which are priceless. Yet many rational people still cannot or will not see this danger. This is not surprising, as we live in cultures that glorify the pursuit of consumptive happiness. This is not a mere coincidence of ideals. Many entities have a vested interest in keeping us fixated on consumptive happiness. The businesses that inundate our media certainly don't want you making your own happiness. Content people don't need to consume more. They are satisfied. Business models depend on your dissatisfaction. Their products are not designed to satisfy you for life, but just enough for you to come back for another fix when your satisfaction wanes. In this light, it's hard to see the difference between an Apple store and an opium den. Every Apple product has a built-in obsolescence, not just of functionality, but of satisfaction. Compare how you felt about your iPhone 6 when you just bought it, to how you feel about it now, when compared to the iPhone 8 or X or whatever iteration we're on. The same object that brought you satisfaction and even pride now fills you with contempt and even shame. The iPhone hasn't changed, it's your perception that has changed. Or should I say, it has been changed. Your perception has been changed by an endless stream of messages in our commercials, ads, movies, and TV shows that insidiously seeks to commodify everything. This mechanism inserts itself wherever possible between you and happiness. You want that girl? Writing her poetry is for pussies. Buy Axe body wash. The girls will be all over you. By this process, you've not only bought some foul-smelling soap, you've also bought the idea that the girl herself is a commodity. Meanwhile, your desire for a meaningful relationship has been reduced to another form of consumption. Moreover, this system wants to commodify your very identity. Oh, you drink that beer? Well, I drink this beer. You have a PC? I use an Apple. I get my organic fresh produce from Whole Foods. Have you seen my Louis Vuitton bag? My Prada glasses? My Porsche? We've been led to confuse our identities with our choices in the marketplace. And it's not just companies that want to keep you consuming. Your government also has a keen interest in your engagement in consumptive happiness. On the most basic level, our conspicuous consumption generates tax revenue, whereas they have yet to find a mechanism by which to tax a hug. Yet the rot runs deeper. In governments across the world, the poor go to prison and the rich pay fines. The poor pay taxes, the rich store their wealth in the Cayman Islands. Social programs are cut by the same politicians who cut taxes for the wealthy. Proof enough that political power can be bought and sold just like any other commodity. Yet even if our politicians aren't actively corrupt, they are living in a corrupt paradigm. A paradigm in which the market dictates the value of everything, even people. Politicians, both conservative and neoliberal, see free markets as the solution to all the world's ills, never noticing the problems that free markets cause, never mentioning the fact that the lion's share of the benefits go to the wealthy, and the majority of the problems come to rest on the shoulders of the poor. This alliance of government and business means that the state-sponsored consumptive message is not limited to advertisements and mass media. It makes its way into legislation, from tax codes to stimulus bills to trade policies. It characterizes public discourse. After 9/11, our president at the time, in all seriousness, told us Americans to go shopping for Christmas. Otherwise, the terrorists win. This noxious message even seeps into our educational system, where marketable skills are valued over an understanding of history or appreciation of art. The lesson is clear. Even you are a commodity, who must be marketable enough for your employer to pay for you. Now, I'm not saying consumptive pleasures are inherently bad. After all, we have to eat, and we might as well eat something tasty. Upon coming to China, I personally spent exorbitant sums on a comfortable bed. I have to sleep. I might as well sleep somewhere comfy. Moreover, there are things we need to function in this world, from clothes to cars to computers. We cannot possibly create everything we need on our own. The division of labor, the very cornerstone of civilization, necessitates the trade of goods and services. And civilization has benefited greatly from trade. Trade allows for specialization, unlocking ever more human potential. Trade leads to technological innovation and improves our quality of life. Trade brings us goods and ideas from around the world. Trade even holds back the tides of war. Despite all their bluster, you need never fear that China and the U.S. will fight. They're too busy trading with one another. In many respects, trade is necessary. Trade isn't bad. What's bad is when we confuse this necessity with civic virtue, when we confuse our identity with our purchases, when we confuse our own value for the value of our stuff, when we value things over people, when we allow our desires to be dictated by marketers, when we're so busy buying happiness that we forget that we can create happiness for ourselves. That is when we stop being unique, creative individuals and start being merely consumers.